Okay, I hope everyone is ready. I'm going to start now. So the title for today's lesson is In His Time. In His Time. So when I say in His time, I mean God's perfect time in your life. Have you ever prayed, knelt down and prayed before and asked God for something? You went, for example, you went and you were like, "Dear God, I want this brand new BMX bicycle. In Jesus' name, Amen." You might have said that. And then immediately you would have rushed to the front door, opened the door, only to find that there's nothing out of the ordinary. You might have thought, okay, let me give God more time. And so the next day also, you go and open the door, there's nothing. The day after you try, nothing. And again, you do it, nothing. And then you start wondering, did God actually hear my prayer that time? Maybe he didn't understand it. Or maybe it's not his will. Or maybe he isn't able to do it. So these doubts and these questions that we have, if God actually did do what you asked, or whether I actually am going to get that BMX or not, you might have those questions when you pray like that. But the Bible says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11, he makes all things beautiful in his time. He makes all things beautiful in his time. And the word used for beautiful can also be translated as good, excellent, pleasant, or perfect. So God has a perfect time, an appointed time in your life. He knows when to give you what, and he knows what to give you when. He's never early or late, but he's always on time. You might have some area in your life that is broken, that is lacking, that is too ugly. But in God, in his right time, he can make whatever those things are, he can convert them into beauty and perfection. One such story that properly describes this is John chapter 11, verse 1 to 44, the story of Lazarus. The Lazarus that was in Bethany, raised from the dead, not the other poor man Lazarus. Okay, so Lazarus, the story goes like this. Mary and Martha, who are sisters of Lazarus, they send Jesus a letter. They send a letter from Bethany. Jesus is somewhere one day away from Bethany. He sends Jesus a letter telling Jesus that their brother Lazarus is sick. And the word sick there is not something that is like a cold or a flu that can be cured with over-the-counter medication, but this sick was used to refer to something that is homebound or bedridden, something more serious that could even lead to death. So Martha, Lazarus, and Mary, they're the trio siblings, and they love each other, that they live together in Bethany. And they also love Jesus, as they're close friends with Jesus. They've even had him over at their place. You can read about it in Luke. So they send Jesus a letter that reads, "The one you love is sick," because they're so close with Jesus that instead of writing, my brother Lazarus is ill, instead of saying my brother Lazarus is ill, they write, "The one you love is sick." That much close they were with Jesus. And so they were expecting Jesus to drop everything that he had to go over to Bethany to touch and heal Lazarus, so he'll be up and about. But instead, in verse 4, Jesus says this, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." So that sounds okay, right? It sounds assuring. They might have thought, okay, the chap is going to make it after all, because this sickness will not end in death. So Jesus stays where he's staying for 2 more days, and then he leaves to see Lazarus in Bethany. So Jesus leaves and he arrives in Bethany, only to find Lazarus not walking about, not on his bed taking his pills, not even in his deathbed uttering his last words. Instead, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days and has been buried for 4 days. So Jesus is at the funeral and he sees Martha, one of the sisters of Lazarus in this picture. Martha sees Jesus and Martha comes running to Jesus. She runs to him and says, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." She's talking about Lazarus. "If you would have been here," God, in verse 21 in the screen, "if you would have been here, my brother would not have died." But then she says, "But I know that even now, if you ask God, whatever you ask God, he will give it to you," in verse 22. So Jesus says in verse 23, he will rise again. And after a while, Mary, the other sister of Lazarus, remember it's a sibling trio, the other sister of Lazarus, Mary, sees Jesus, and then she drops everything and she runs to Jesus. She also says the same thing her sister said, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. But then she starts weeping, and then the people around her in the funeral also start weeping. They all start weeping, and they also begin to question Jesus. One of them, they asked, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? The questioning, if you healed the blind man, couldn't you have saved this sick man from dying? So Jesus gets emotional. He gets troubled as well with their reactions. Jesus asks them, where's Lazarus? Where is the body? They show the tomb of Lazarus. Jesus goes towards the entrance and says, roll away the stone. The sisters say, but Lord, he's been there for 4 days and he started to rot and he's smelling, the body smells as well. So, you shouldn't do that. But then Jesus says, he insists, roll away the stone. So after they roll away the stone, Jesus says a few words. He says in verse 43 on the screen, third bullet point, it says, Lazarus, come out. Lazarus, come out. He just says those 3 words. And lo and behold, miraculously, the man who was dead for buried 4 days, Lazarus, he comes out of the tomb walking, wrapped in bandages from head to toe. And Jesus says, you can see in the picture. So Jesus says to his disciples, go and remove his bandages and let him go. So you might be in a similar situation as Martha and Mary. You might be in a situation where it's on its last legs. It's just about to collapse on you. And then you might have a sick Lazarus. The Hebrew word for Lazarus, it means God helped. A sick Lazarus, you might have a sick Lazarus. A sick Lazarus is some area in your life that is lacking and that cannot be dealt with by the hands of man. But instead, it needs the hand of God to move and to function. So then, like Mary and her sister Martha, you send a letter to Jesus. You kneel and you pray and you invite Jesus to Bethany. Jesus, come to Bethany. And by the way, the Hebrew word for Bethany translates to the house of affliction or house of depression. So you tell Jesus, come to my house of affliction. Come to my house of depression. Come into my Bethany. Come into my afflictions. Come into my troubles, into my circumstances, into my problems. Just like Mary and and Martha, you would have prayed and invited Jesus. But then you find that your sick Lazarus is now a dead Lazarus. So, and you think that, oh, okay, that's it for me. Everything is over. My Lazarus who was sick is now dead. My dreams, my opportunities, my results, my promotions, all of which are now dead. There's no coming out from this. That's it for me. So you might be thinking like that. And then you might even tell God, just as Mary and Martha said, Lord, if you would have been here with me, this would not have happened. If you had been here with me, I wouldn't have gotten into trouble. If you would have been here with me, my problem would not have ended this way. I wouldn't have been told off. I wouldn't have been grounded or whatever. You might have said that. And notice a difference in the words they used to Jesus. At the start, if you go back to the previous slide in verse 3, it says, the one you love is sick. That's how they refer to Lazarus. But then when Lazarus dies, they refer to Lazarus as, my brother. Instead of previously, they referred to him as the one you love. But now they refer to him as my brother. Isn't it interesting that how when it seems like God isn't doing anything in our life, and it seems like our life is still in the same state and that our problems are not changing, our life is not changing, we start to disassociate God from our lives. We start to disassociate God from our problems. Instead of saying the one you love, you say my brother, my problems, because I know those are my problems. You take the load that you've already given into God's hand and you take it back and you put it back on yourself, on your back. So that's what sometimes we do. And also another important thing to note in this is the difference in Mary and Martha's reception of Jesus. Now, yes, both of the sisters, when they saw Jesus, they dropped everything they had and went to him. And both of them said, Lord, if you hadn't been here, my brother would be alive. But there's a difference. Martha does not stop there. In verse 22, she says, I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. I know that even now, my problems can be fixed. I know that even now my problems, my situation can be overcome. But I can still do this. But whereas Mary, she starts crying and weeping and falls at Jesus' feet, and the people around her also start crying, and the people around her start questioning, if he could heal other people, why couldn't he heal this person? Sometimes when we're in situations like this, your friends, your colleagues, or even your family members might question God. Why didn't he do this for you? Maybe you've done something wrong. Maybe it's not his will. Or maybe your problem is just too big for him. But it says over here, a second. But unlike Mary, we should receive Jesus like Martha, who received her in faith. Instead of listening to what other people say and allowing our faith to stumble, we should stand in faith and receive Jesus in faith when he comes. Because God, when you pray and ask God something, God, what he does, he boxes it, he packages the thing that you ask for, and then he ships it to you. It's coming to you, but you just don't know when. So you need to wait and receive it in faith. Because God only delivers your package, he only delivers what he has for you in Faith Street. And he's not going to deliver it to I don't see how Boulevard, because that's how it is. And those dreams, those opportunities, those blessings, those results, those promotions that you thought were dead were actually delayed. Not dead, but delayed. Then you might say, what are you talking about? Jesus says in the previous verse that it will not end in death. But clearly it did. Lazarus died. But what Jesus actually meant was that it will not remain in death. Though it seems dead, it will not continue in death. Instead, it'll come alive. We'll see that in the next part. By the way, in Jewish tradition, they believe that after 3 days, after a person has died, and after 3 days, his spirit remains intact only for 3 days. After 3 days, it leaves his body. The spirit leaves his body after he dies. But Lazarus was well past the expiration date because it was 4 days and his body started to smell and rot as well. But Jesus, what does he do? In just a few words, he says, Lazarus, come out. In Hebrew, it's probably even less than 3 words. He says, Lazarus, come out. What happens? Miraculously, Lazarus is alive. He comes out just like that. Sometimes it takes just one word at the right time in your life for God to change everything, your problems around, just like that. It only takes a Lazarus come out to take you from your situations, from your problems, in just a fraction of a second. The people around you, you and the people around you might think that, oh, it's too late. God can't do this. That's it. There's no way you're coming out of this. But for God, for Jesus, that was the moment of miracle. That was the hour of healing. That was the day of deliverance. It's your time. And what would have been a simple healing miracle, it might have been the healing of the sick Lazarus, another healing miracle. Instead of that, this became one of the greatest miracles that Jesus had done in his ministry. When we talk about the miracles of Jesus, one of the first things, if not the first thing that will pop up in your head, is the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Like that, God allows those small little windows to get closed, those small doors to be shut, so that he can pave way for a wider, bigger gate to be opened in your life. So much big that people will remember it for generations. So you might wonder, okay, oh, by the way, there are some miracles, there are some requests that you pray and you ask God, and instantaneously it gets fulfilled. But God, there are some requests that we pray and ask God. God has set time, an appointed time for that miracle. And you might think, why does God have a set time for that? Why can't he just do it then and there? So we're going to discuss 3 points, 3 reasons on why God has a set appointed time in your life. Why? Basically, these 3 points are what God does behind the scenes, what he does in the meantime, as you can see in the title, what he does in the meantime until that set and appointed time arrives. So number 1, he prepares you. He prepares you. He prepares you to receive your blessing. So you might have prayed, and just because you are impatient, just because you think you're ready, doesn't mean you're actually ready to receive his blessing. You might, because God says, before you look around and expect your surroundings to change, before you look around and expect the people around you and your life to change, you first must change. As it says in Psalms chapter 31, verse 15, my times are in your hands. Deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me. So this verse, my times are in your hands, it clearly shows that God is in control of our time. God is in control of everything in our life, what happens and when it happens in our life. In this verse, the particular ones, there's a problem here. Okay, so now the reason God does this, the reason that God has set appointed times is because when this happens, we are forced to wait. We are forced to wait because when we wait, we start seeking God, we start looking for Him, we start realizing that only Him, and by only Him are we able to pull through out of this situation. Only through Him can we overcome this. When we were in Dubai, we prayed and we were struggling with, when we were in Dubai, we were struggling with financial problems. There were unpaid bills. There were things we needed money for. We prayed, and just praying did not just, our answers did not just pop out the front door. Instead, we had to wait, and we wait, and we prayed, and we waited, and waiting. And in doing so, this strengthened our faith. This grew our faith. It built a relationship, a trust with God, a bond that cannot easily be broken, that is indestructible. Because when we are forced to wait, our eyes get opened, and we start seeing that God is the only solution. Those other possibilities, those other options that can help us overcome, none of those matter. Only God is the only answer to your question. And in waiting on Him allows us to open our eyes to this fact. Another example is the people of Israel. We all know the story. They left Egypt and they were going to the promised land. So what God appointed a time of 11 days. Now, usually from Egypt to Canaan, it could take them 11 days for them to travel. But instead of that, they started murmuring, they started complaining, they were disobedient. So instead of reaching there in God's appointed time, His perfect time of 11 days, it took them 40 years. That is many, many, many times the amount of what could have happened. So if you're wondering, can I influence God's time for me? Can I affect what time He has set for me? And the answer is yes. This principle is quite important because to an extent, it is in our hands to determine whether we are condensing the time that God has for us, or are we delaying the promised, the perfect time that God has in our life, just like the people of Israel did. Because of their murmuring and their complaining, what could have been 11 days, God's right time, they had to delay it, they had to elongate the time to 40 years. And another reason is in He prepares you is that God will not give you more than you can handle. In the story of Joseph, we know that Joseph did not interpret, the story did not start by Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream. Joseph did not learn to interpret dreams or learn what a dream is when he went into court and saw Pharaoh and heard his dream. No, that's not what happened. Instead, from the start itself, Joseph, when he was with his family, he started seeing dreams, he started interpreting his dreams. In fact, that was one of the reasons what angered his brother. And then he again heard about the wine bearer and the baker's dreams, and he interpreted their dreams as well. And then finally he went there. So God guides you. He trains you before He puts you in a position to fail. He guides you. He does not put you in a sinking ship that you're not sure what to do, but instead He raises you up. He teaches you, guides you, and then He puts you and He prepares you. You can think of it like this. God, He gives you the right thing in the right time, in the right place, to the right you. Okay, so we went over the first reason, that is He prepares you, number one. And number two is He prepares the people. So when I say people, I refer to the right circumstances and situations in your life. And in the New Testament, an appropriate word for this, a very good word, is kairos. Kairos. You can try saying it as well. Kairos, which means opportune time. It means the right time, the perfect time. It means it is a faith junction. And a faith junction, you might have heard that word, is when God intersects people. He speaks to people, and then He causes them to intersect, creating a kairos moment, creating an opportune time, an opportune event, sorry. And a good example of this is when Saul meets Samuel. Saul meets Samuel. Saul was looking for his donkey. He couldn't find his donkey anywhere. So then he hears about Samuel who's a prophet, and he says, okay, I'm going to go to this prophet and ask for help, ask him, where can I find my donkey? And while he's doing this, and he's going to look, and he's going to Samuel, God speaks to Samuel beforehand and says, there's a boy who's going to come looking for his donkey, and his name is Saul, and he will be the next king of Israel. By next king, I mean the first king. He will be crowned king of Israel. So that was a Kairos moment. That was an opportune event, a fate junction where Saul and Samuel intersected. Likewise, God is preparing a Kairos moment in your life. He's appointing someone where you will meet and intersect that could change your life. It could be your new teacher, it could be your family member, it could be your friends, it could be someone you least expect that God is using in your life. And another example is Joseph in prison. We were talking about Joseph earlier. So Joseph was in prison and he met with the wine bearer. So there was an intersection between the wine bearer who had a troubling dream and Joseph, the dream interpreting expert. So this intersection is what introduced Joseph to the palace, which introduced him to Pharaoh, because that moment allowed the wine bearer, that moment allowed the wine bearer to tell the Pharaoh about Joseph's talent, his expertise. It created a Kairos moment where Joseph's skills and expertise were needed in the palace. Likewise, God is creating a Kairos moment, an opportune event in your life where your skills, your knowledge, and your value will be needed, whether it will be in your university, your school, your workplace, wherever it is. God is creating a Kairos moment. He's preparing the people, the circumstance around you to showcase your worth. So we went over two reasons. Prepares you, he prepares the people, and finally, he prepares the place. So we all know the story of Genesis, how God created the world. He started with light, he separated light, then he made the seas, the sky, and then the dry land, the plants in the dry land. Then he made the sun and the moon, the stars, and then, then he made the aquatic animals, the fish. Then he made the birds, and then he made the animals on land. And then finally, on the sixth day, what does he make? He makes man. So imagine if God did not follow this order of creation. Instead, he made man in day one. Do you think man would have survived? What would have happened? No, they wouldn't. Instead, he had to make a place for man. He first had to create a world to put man in. He had to make a home to put man in. Another verse that says, another example I can give you is when you're buying a pet, especially if it's a fish, you don't just go and buy a fish. Instead, you prepare a fish tank or a bowl or something to put where you can put the fish in, where you can live. You don't just go and buy a fish like that. Instead, you first make a place, and then you buy the thing that you can put in the place. A verse that says this is, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Now, we all know about the second coming of Christ, and that will happen at the appointed time of God. And that is something that we all are waiting together as a family, where Christ will come and he will collect his bride, that is us, the church. Now, Christ comes to collect his bride. We are the bride of Christ, by the way, of the church, in case you didn't know that. And we can go into detail more in another lesson. But for now, in this verse, it says, no one knows the hour, not even the Son, not even Jesus, but the Father alone. Now, this verse is often misinterpreted. It says that Jesus doesn't know when this is coming, so which means maybe the Jesus is not equal in the Trinity, maybe they're not equal status, but actually that's wrong. What this is referring to the context of Jewish marriage procedures, because in Jewish marriage procedures, it works like this. Okay, I'm not going to tell you in detail, but essentially, the father of the groom looks for a wife for the groom to marry, and then and the groom cannot marry the wife until he departs the bride, and then he goes and he makes a wedding chamber. So until he prepares a wedding chamber, only then can he collect his bride. But not even then. Even after he prepares his wedding chamber, he still cannot collect his bride. Why? Because his father, once his father, starts looking and inspecting and, things like that, only then in his appointed time, only when the father knows, he only knows the time. Even after he prepares the wedding chamber, he cannot go collect the bride and collect his bride. Instead, his father has to say, okay, now it's time. You may go and collect your bride. So likewise, God is preparing a place for you. There is an opportune time. There is a perfect, place that God is preparing in your life for you. In Joseph's life, it was the position that in the palace. God, in Joseph's life, the place for him was the palace, and the position that he filled was the second in command all over Egypt. Similarly, the people of Israel, their place was the promised land, that was Canaan. Likewise, God is preparing a place and a position for you to fill in. So until then, we should trust his timing. We should, because we believe in God's perfect timing. As it says in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9, a man's heart plans his course, but the Lord establishes his steps. You may have dreams, ambitions, goals, targets to fulfill, but only in the Lord's perfect time will all of that come to fruition. We should trust in his time. Why? Because God him itself is out of the boundaries of time. As it says in 2 Peter 3:8, 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like 1 day to the Lord. Basically saying that God is not confined to the boundaries of time. Time does not affect him. So we should trust in his time. We should trust in the best time that he has in our life. Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90 when God gave him Isaac. That was their son. So when Sarah first heard about that God was going to give them a son, she laughed, as you can see in this picture, because anyone would laugh, because she was way too old to receive a son at that time. Similarly, like Sarah, you might be laughing, but at the opposite reason. You might be thinking, I'm too young for God to use me. I'm too small for God to use me. I'm too little, or maybe I'm less talented. I'm not qualified enough. I can't do this, or something like that. You don't reach up to those standards. You might be laughing at that. You might say, no, I do not amount to that much. So how can God use me? But in the same way that he used Sarah, in the same way he did in his perfect time, in his Kairos moment, in that time, the same way he did that miracle. As you can see in the second picture, though she's laughing in the second picture, she's holding that son. Same way God says, come, Lazarus, come out. Same way in his time in your life, he will lift you up, and there's nothing that can stop it. There's no one that can stop it. And there's nothing in your life that can also stop it. It's not your face, or not your race, or who you are, not your talents, or not anything in your life can stop it, because when it is his time, he will lift you up. Now, to summarize this, we learned about God's perfect timing. We learned about how he prepares you, 3 reasons of why God has an appointed time, what he does behind the scenes. He prepares you, he prepares the people, and he prepares the place. In simpler terms, a shorter way to summarize these 3 points to help you remember is, at the right time, God does the right thing in the right place, using the right people or circumstances to the right you. So that's how you can remember it. He does the right thing at the right time in the right place, using the right people to the right you. So remember, when it is his time, it'll be your time to shine. Thank you all for listening, and God bless.